Hi, Angela Wolf here. Today we are on another wrap dress, and this one is a little bit different style because it has a faced neckline. The other thing that's different is it has a belt closure, and inside here is a button to keep it in place. So let's take a look at this pattern. A little bit different on the front, where the whole left side is the full front piece. So right here is where you're going to sew a buttonhole, and then you're going to attach a button to the side of the garment because this will wrap in, tie, and then this is the outside piece that can flip back. So you're going to insert a belt into this seam. That's a shorter belt, and you're going to insert a belt into this side seam. But we're not going to focus on that. What I want to talk about again is the neckline because it's a facing, and this is probably one of the most important parts of this dress. So I've already sewn it together. Here's the front. You can see it's an entire front piece. Here's the back. The only difference on this back is I added a center back seam. This makes it really easy for fitting, by the way, if you give yourself a center seam. And then here's the other front, which is only a half a one that folds back. So here is my facing piece. It's cut that will fit the neckline. I've already attached the inner facing to the back side. This is just a fusible knit, and sewed the shoulder seams. And let's go insert this, and I'll show you some tips for this to make sure your neckline does not stretch out. So I'm just setting this up for a straight stitch. I prefer my needle in the center position. I've got a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to stitch. Again, I'm not going to pin this because I'm actually going to hold this in place. So hold this and allow the feed dogs to ease that bottom fabric in. And this is an area that's stretching. This is right across the front. Let the fabric underneath ease in a little bit. And now we're getting to the shoulder area almost. I'm going to just go a little bit further. Get my hands out of the way. Match up your shoulder seam. Now for the shoulder area, you want the fabric to feed through identically. You don't want the bottom to be more or less, if that makes any sense. Go across the shoulder. And let's go to the back area. Again, I'm going to match up. You can see that without that facing, it's already stretching out that bottom piece. So I'm just going to hold it in place and keep stitching around. Notice that I pressed my shoulder seams open. This is a ponte knit, so it's a little bit thicker than other fabrics. I'm just going to slide, make sure that both of my seam allowances are faced open like this for my shoulder seam. Then you don't have all that bulk. Go around to the front, and again, we're going back to the front side. Go to the edge. I like to do a little back stitch there, just because if you accidentally trim too close later on, you'll rip out that stitch. And then you'll go all the way to the hem. And I know we're going to be talking about hems later on, but this hem with facing is a little bit different. So now I'm stitching all the way down the front of the top. Again, making sure this lines up. I cut this off so it's more of a shirt style. I didn't think you need to see the whole length of this. All the way to the bottom. Now, here is where I do all of this in one step. So I've stitched the entire facing on. And if I know that my hem is going to be, say, 1 or 2 inches, this one I believe is 1 inch, I will line this up and stitch right across the bottom. All in one step. Okay, so it's stitched on. We're not finished yet. I'm gonna grab my scissors, and for this, you have to imagine the hem is gonna be folded up here. So I wanna get rid of some of this excess. So for the facing along the hem, I cut this off, just like this. And when I get about 1 inch away from the front edge, I'm gonna trim the entire piece off, just like that. Trim it on an angle right here. Go up the edge, and notice how I'm going to use my scissors. I have them angled. So this will allow, you're not cutting the fabric both. I'm getting rid of this seam, but one edge is a little bit longer than the other. It just makes it look nicer when you fold it to the right side to press. All right, just gonna go around. I'm not gonna do the whole thing, but I'll just do part of it. Okay, you saw that part. Now let's go around the neck edge. You would do this all the way up the side. Here at this area, just give yourself a little angle. And again, if you trim this close enough, like 1/4 of an inch, you don't need to add little snips. You might have seen where you can snip like this for your collar. You can still do that if you have really thick fabric, but what I usually do is just trim really close. You're gonna do that all the way around that whole front edge. I'm just gonna do a little bit more though because I wanna show you some tips for pressing and top stitching. At the iron, the first thing I'm gonna do is press the seam allowance up away from the garment, just like this. Now my fusible interfacing is already attached, but make sure you don't go like this on top of this interfacing because what can happen is it can twist and make a really big mess. Now I didn't trim this entire thing. I didn't think you needed to see all of that. So I'm just doing this one little edge to give you an idea. Now press this towards the wrong side of the fabric. And one thing I want to point out is notice this seam. See how I'm kind of pushing this back? So you can barely see the seam allowance on this side. So from the right side, there's nothing. So you have an option. When you get to this point, you do this all the way around. You can either add top stitching to here or do understitching. So understitching, in case you've never done that before, I have my seam allowance towards the facing. And I'm just gonna do this for a little section so you know what this is. You're just stitching right on the edge, and what you're doing is you're attaching the seam allowance to the facing side. So there you go. And then that will fold to the right side, like that. All right, now what about that button and buttonhole that we were talking about? So the next step on this top is I'm going to need to add a buttonhole in this area because this is going to snap into the side seam. So I'm just going to bring this up here and I'm going to do all this in one step. Change my foot out. Whatever button you have chosen, just stick it in the back here and that will show you. This tells the machine how big to make a buttonhole. I'm going to just guide this in place. And slide that down. Choose a buttonhole. You're not going to see it, so you don't need to be really decorative, but just find a buttonhole that will work for you. And again, this is going into the side. I'm moving it over just a little bit because I want it out of the way where my side seam is going to go. Now, on this edge here, this edge will be finished with a serger. If you wanted to do a true finish, you could fold this facing to the back and finish it like that. I'm just going to run it through a serger. So I'm just trying to show you the parts that are a little bit more important. Guide this up here right to the top edge, and let's go ahead and sew our buttonhole. This would be a nice area also on some of the past dresses I've shown you. If you didn't want to use a tie on the inside, you could have used a button. You just have to make sure that that front piece reaches all the way over to your back side seam. All right, let's see. Let's go back up to the table and take a look at this. So this is what the seam would finish looking like. If I wanted to add top stitching, I could. Here's my buttonhole. And again, you could use something to stop it from fraying. Ponting it really doesn't fray, as you can see on here. So by the way, if you don't have a serger and you don't want to finish this seam, nobody's going to see it. So give it a little pressing here. And this will cut that buttonhole. There we go. All right, so you're gonna have a few more steps left, and then I just wanna give you a couple tips for the belt. So here's my back. The next thing would be to either add your sleeves, sew your side seams, but the belt that we have, if you look over here, we have this part here is attached into the facing part, which I didn't do there because I wanted to show you the facing, but you would have followed your directions on your pattern. On the back side here, this belt is attached into the side seam. So the longer belt is into the side seam and the shorter one is into the facing, like this. So you would have, fold this out. The belt that you can make any width you want. You don't have to follow the pattern. So the longer one would be in this side seam here. So you would just pin it into place and then with right sides together sew your entire seam. That part would be finished. This would go around the back, and then of course you would have attached on this side here into the facing. You would have put your other belt here. What about the belt? Let me give you a few tips for that. So here we have, this side is finished already. You can see on the belt, in the past, in the last season, we did a trench coat, and I mentioned sometimes that you have fusible interfacing, which will make this a little bit more stable for a belt. Not always, but I like for this Ponte knit, it will keep it stable. So you can see I've attached a piece of interfacing to this, stitched down. I will turn it to the right side out, and that's how I end up with this here. So that just gives it a little more stability. You could also have narrow ones. Have fun with that one. It also depends on how wide your belt loop is. So for here, this belt loop, I would just slide this under. You can fold it once or twice. Remember, because there's fusible interfacing in this, if you fold this over again like this, that's really thick. And I'll show you that again over there. So that's one thing. And let me show you how to attach these guys. I think I've already cut a little hole. See this? So these are rivets. You just put this in place like this and push it through. So ideally, you want to use really sharp scissors. I'll just do another one just so you can see. Really sharp scissors. You don't want to make the hole too big because what will happen is the rivet will fall out. Just like that. Push this through. Okay. And there are directions to this on the package. I didn't make this up. Put this right in place. You're going to be using a hammer, so you might want to do it on the floor. Don't mess up your table. And don't do it really hard. I have a bad tendency when I'm doing my jeans to pound too hard, and you can ruin the rivet. So, you see? And on the back side, oh, I didn't do it hard enough. Let me try one more. Just give it a little knock. There we go. And now it's attached. And you can attach these all the way up. So grab like a marking, the chalk or something like that to give yourself these little holes. Add the rivets, very simple to do. And now let's go back to this dress. I want to show a few more things. I'm not going to show you how to sew this, but it'll give you some tips. So you can see on this dress, I finished the facing, and what did I do? I added top stitching. So the top stitching that I added here, all the way around the neckline and all the way down the front. You can see my belt in here. I actually left that just to show you. I would go back in and trim this. So when you fit this on yourself, you want to make sure that this is not hanging too far over. So the belt can be however long you want it to be, but if you noticed on here, you don't want it to be hanging all the way to the bottom. So I have my rivets in place. I did some nice top stitching on there and the hem. And this is the part I want you to see. So you can get a visual for this button. That buttonhole, all I did was attach a button to the side seam right here. And this button's in place and wraps around. So that is another variation of a wrap dress. Something easy, a little classier.